Yeah, perfect. We are officially started. So, hello everyone. Today we are thrilled to welcome you to this webinar that transcends borders and unites women in voice from Italy and Switzerland for the first time ever. Together, we will talk about the power of conversation technology for a social impact. We want to explore the realm of assistive technology with a special focus on those with limited motor, cognitive, and communicative abilities. With us, there are Rasita and Olga Capirci, two pioneers in the field of voice technology and assistive communication. A brief introduction to who is Rasita and who is Olga. First of all, Dr. Rasita is a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Zurich, has dedicated her career to the ethical improvement of dementia care through digital assistive technologies. Her cutting-edge work delves into the use of voice assistants to provide behavioral and lifestyle intervention to individuals living with dementia. With a wealth of experience in the realm of bioethics and background that spans across different continents, she brings a unique and global perspective to this discussion. On the other hand, we have Professor Olga Capirci, Research Director at the National Research Council Institute of Cognitive Sciences and Technologies in Rome. Dedicated over 3 decades in the study of communication and language, particularly in children with typical and atypical development. Her commitment to enhancing the importance of multimodal approaches to communication is truly remarkable. Professor Capirci is currently leading several groundbreaking research projects, ranging from developing software platforms for those with sensory disabilities to understanding and addressing the diverse aspects of autism. So together we will discuss about the future of assistive technology and their transformative potential. I'm going to turn it over to Caterina, who will co-host this webinar with me. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. By the way, I just realized that my name is not on it. My name is Caterina, but you can call me Catty. So, okay, just for your information. Right, so I'm gonna start with the first question. Maybe I'm gonna start with you, Olga. So the first question would be if you could discuss the potential benefits of integrating gesture or nonverbal cues into interfaces of digital assistive technologies for people with different disabilities. So it stays really open in that sense. And how would you think this might impact the user experience of these people?
Okay, thank you, Caterina and Serena, for the introduction. I want only to add to my introduction that my field of studies is particularly in gesture. For the lab that I had is language and communication across modalities. So with a focus on the multimodality for gesture, but also with deaf at 360 degrees, so sign languages and deaf people. And so for this question, I want only give a brief introduction that told you that in the last 30 years, the increment of multimodal corpora stimulated a sophisticated investigation of the relationship between the verbal and non-verbal component in spoken communication. There is no spontaneous spoken communication that is not matched by gestures. For gesture, we can mean facial expression, hand movement, but also posture, body movement. And so gesture is considered a universal feature of human communication. They are produced by all speakers in every culture. And when we think about the relationship between verbal sequence and gestures, we should not imagine that the latter, the gesture, have a merely subordinate function to the word, but rather that there is a relationship of semiotic cooperation between gesture and vocal input, output. And the presence of gestures is useful both to the recipient and to the speaker. In fact, gestures are present also, for example, when we speak on the phone and among blind speakers from birth. The blind speaker gesture also when they speak to another blind person. And this debate on multimodality of language and embodiment is growing exponentially in recent years. And just to mention one paper, the paper of Pamela Pernis in 2018, that had an emblematic title, Why We Should Study Multimodal Language. So gesture and nonverbal cue can provide also an alternative means of interaction for individuals with a wide range of disabilities, including those with speech impairment, cognitive disabilities, and this broadens the accessibility also of digital technology, making them more inclusive. For example, for individuals with speech or communication impairment, nonverbal cues such as gesture, facial expression, movements can serve as a more natural and expressive way to convey their thought and emotions. And so this can enhance their ability to communicate with others, but also for people that have cognitive disabilities or conditions like autism. Using gestures and nonverbal cue may reduce the cognitive load and the need to process complex verbal information. And so this simplification can lead to more effective interaction with digital technology. And combining gesture with other communication methods such as text or speech to text can create a multimodal approach to communication. And this redundancy can help to ensure that the message is understood, even if one mode of communication is unclear or is ambiguous. So when user can interact with technology in a way that feels natural, more intuitive, their overall satisfaction and engagement with the technology increase, leading to a more positive user experience.
If I may now continue. Firstly, thank you so much to Katy and to Serena for organizing this, and it's also nice to meet you, Olga, and really thank you for your discussions and starting off this question. I would perhaps take an alternative or an additional perspective, especially focusing on individuals with cognitive impairments, especially through dementia or stroke patients, or even individuals that do have other forms of communication problems where they have difficulty either speaking or understanding speech. And so having alternative communication strategies, especially for such a group of individuals, can help them overcome everything that you just mentioned, Olga, but also overcome a form of a communication barrier that affects really every aspect of their life. I mean, currently, if you look at therapy that's delivered face-to-face, there are a lot of picture cards that are widely used by nonverbal individuals, especially to communicate with others. And so when we can digitalize these resources and provide them through assistive technologies, it can make the whole process a lot more easier, quicker, but also very clearer for these individuals to communicate. And then, of course, they can be integrated with other nonverbal communication strategies, like you mentioned, Olga, with gestures or facial expressions. And again, it just makes it very user-friendly for individuals that have different needs and, different ways of expressing themselves. It allows them to have different modes of communication as well. And, not everything is so intuitive for every single individual, and everyone has different needs. And also, it depends a lot on the disabilities that they have. So again, like these multimodal interfaces that you mentioned can be very helpful for them to interact in a way that is more natural to them and also comes kind of intuitively to them. I think for dementia patients in particular, using forms of augmented or virtual aids can really be beneficial, especially for forms of memory training, for instance. And again, memory training is really crucial for such a population group to carry out everyday tasks in order to maintain their independence or even perform activities of daily living, as we call them. And I mean, in order to, once they're able to perform these sorts of activities, it's also really crucial to help them maintain their dementia from getting worse. So I think having such forms of technologies that can aid in communication, such as these, can really help them in their everyday lives to also maintain their condition and not make it worse. I think there's also a really important aspect of accessibility that's improved when you incorporate different forms of communication strategies, such as gestures or facial expressions or other nonverbal cues, especially through digital assistive technologies. So if we think of maybe smart TVs or virtual assistants or even smart speakers having some sort of alternative verbal interaction through gestures, for instance, can then allow the user to communicate in a way that's more expressive to them, perhaps. And, it can also make it quite fun for them to engage in. And the more fun that we can make these interactions, especially with the technologies, the more likely they are to continue using it in their everyday lives. And of course, expanding the possibilities of their use and implementation. And of course, like we mentioned, not all the interfaces are so suitable for all types of for all groups of individuals with different disabilities. And having a voice assistant that's could not be so beneficial for someone that has a speech or language impairment, or having a screen that displays gestures and eye movements is not so helpful for someone with a visual impairment. So again, like Olga mentioned, I would also agree that having multimodal interfaces could perhaps be a way to enhance user experience.
Thank you very much, Rasita. Thank you, Olga. Actually very interesting, but maybe we can continue discussing then the topics, and then I don't want to lag everything, otherwise I would ask questions. Yeah, so the second question would be, and maybe I'm going to start with you, Rasita, this time. How, in your opinion, can digital assistive technologies be leveraged to bridge communication gaps and facilitate the understanding of patients' preferences and the consent in individual healthcare, especially when verbal communication is limited?
Yeah, also really interesting question. I think DATs, or digital assistive technology, allow us to present different aspects of caregiving or medical interventions or medical treatments that patients and their families may not actually be fully aware of, or what they mean, or their implications on their lives. And having an assistive technology that's able to provide information on this can also give more detailed information or examples regarding the entire consent process that first takes place. And this would be done obviously before an individual decides to continue with their participation or decide on a specific intervention or a medical treatment. And, these can be done through visualizing the information, for example, by using interactive games, interactive videos, perhaps creating a story or using pictures. And using these forms of examples of communication strategies can allow us to bridge the communication gaps that are present when verbal communication is limited. Also, individuals are just more likely to remember something that they have seen, which was perhaps more interactive and memorable for them, as opposed to reading a long piece of text, for instance. That's normally actually the case, especially for informed consent. It can be quite overwhelming. And, if someone has some sort of a cognitive or learning impairment, it can be quite difficult to retain this information and really understand what intervention or this treatment actually means. And it can lead to perhaps a lot of confusion or a lot of mistrust in the system and also in the public health system. So I think there's a really crucial aspect of how digital assistive technologies can help with understanding the consent process, firstly. And then, of course, patient preferences themselves are also really important, and they're very subjective to each individual and their views and their beliefs. To give you a really quick example, I'm currently working with a team on a digital advanced care planning tool, where this assistive technology helps its users to understand, firstly, what are the values that are really important to them, and then what are the medical interventions or decisions that need to be made, and how can we rank them according to each individual's values. So understanding which of the values come into play for different medical interventions or treatments, which can normally be really confusing and obviously difficult to imagine the consequences of such decisions and how they might have an impact in the future lives. Having such digital tools can help not only to make these decisions or to understand these preferences, but also kind of map out the different personal values that are affected and important for future decision making. And this can be really beneficial, for instance, in the future when the person with the disability perhaps loses their ability to participate in decision making or in the consent process. And so if family members and physicians kind of have this mapped out visualization of what would be the individual's preferences or views and values or even wishes towards treatments, they're then able to create some sort of personalized care plan that kind of still maintains the respect for their dignity and their autonomy, and make a decision that's best for the person with the disability.
Okay, so I avoid to repeat the interesting feature that Rasita posed in the table, and move to a more my specific point of view, maybe. And I think that, for example, she mentioned the cognitive difficulty of same individual. And so for patients with cognitive impairment, they can try benefit from digital assistive technology that provide visual cues, as Rasita told, but also step-by-step instruction and facilitate the decision making. And the focus for me is on adapting the care to respect the patient's autonomy and in order to ensure their best interests are met. And it may require also some creative solutions and a close collaboration with patients and also with caregivers, and also a careful documentation to ensure patients receive appropriate care and their preferences are honored. For example, I am thinking particularly to deaf patients, and for deaf person, the video relay services and the remote sign language interpreters can be integrated into healthcare setting. The telehealth and video conferencing platforms can be used, for example, to connect patients with sign language interpreters or to remote healthcare professionals who are fluent in sign language. And specialized healthcare apps can be developed for deaf patients that featuring video-based communication, text messaging, video conferencing, and to create this inclusive telehealth application for deaf people, it's necessary to foresee reports, alerts, all on visual feedback, and to have some subtitles or written part, but also to prevent the presence of an window for a sign language interpreter, or also for an avatar, a non-human avatar that are signing. We are working on this direction with the big project in collaboration also with the Questit. And the importance for deaf people is also in the written materials. The written materials could be have to be available in accessible formats and have to be culturally sensitive to the needs of the deaf community. This material should be present in clear, plain language and consider the specific health literacy needs of deaf individuals. So deaf individuals usually are bilingual. The most and they use sign languages and also vocal and written languages, but the proficiency that they have in written language is not always so high. So we have to consider the and respect the choice of each individual in each language he prefers to use in that so sensitive context particularly.
Yeah, and just to quickly add to that,
yes,
if I may, just that, like, everything Olga mentioned, if you think about it from like a consent process or understanding patient preferences or decision making, it also really all just adds to a quality of care that is provided to these individuals. And just having these like extra parameters that are available to them can just make the individual feel like, my disability does not have to be limiting. It can be quite empowering. So I think it's really important from the aspect of caregiving as well. I know we're talking about the users mainly, but I think there's a really strong impact that these interfaces and multimodal interfaces can have for also caregivers to provide and streamline the care and make it easier to provide aspects of caregiving.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so then we're actually quite early, so you might actually take your time, and maybe I'm going to ask you questions afterwards, follow-up questions. Yeah, so the third question would be, what advice would you give to someone who's looking to work into the conversational technology solutions for people with different level of abilities, be it in one domain or the other? I'm gonna maybe ask you, Olga, to start, please.
Thank you. This question is very, very interesting to me because we usually work in collaboration with people that have to develop this type of technology, and I have a lot of advice to give these people, but also for the sensitive in respect to different levels of abilities, and I have in mind always particularly for deaf people also. I have to add this. And I think that the first block of advice is recognize that individuals with different abilities have unique needs. We repeat, I am very happy with Rasita. We are very agree with this. Start with the different needs of people. And for example, I just say that deaf individuals may use sign language, but may use also written communication or some type of assistive device. So gain a deep understanding of these needs before designing solutions. And in order to make this, you have to collaborate with the community, involve the target user group, such as deaf individual or autism or other type of people in the design and developmental process. Collaborate with them to understand their preference, challenges, and expectation. So is the user-centered design is named this type of work that have to conduct reiterative user testing and gather feedback to refine the solution. So it is a continuous process. And in particular, for me, it's very important to be culturally and linguistically sensitive when working with deaf individuals. Deaf individuals is a particular population. They develop a language, and the language have always linked to a culture. So I want to speak to culturally sensitive, not only linguistic sensitive. and recognize the importance of sign language and the rich culture that surrounds this language. And so the other point could be the multimodal communication that we mentioned before. Consider supporting multiple modes of communication. There is no one mode good for all, but there is text, sign language, speech. Each of these methods suits for different people the best. And continuously update, improve your solution based on user feedback, but also on the evolving of the technology and new developments in artificial intelligence, in natural language processing can enhance the user experience. And the last point I want to mention is the importance of the interdisciplinary collaboration. It's important to collaborate with experts in the fields like linguistics, sign language, deaf studies, assistive technology, in order to create more effective and culturally sensitive solutions. I want only to mention that is a very recent paper that is published now, 2023, that make a test on starting by Google publication, and there is an increasing in publication in the field of ICT, in which we can detect in the title something like sign language. There is a very exponential increasing in the very, also for me that I follow this literature in the last months, there are new paper, but when we detect this type of literature or publication, in order to check for ableist terminology, we found that in the field of ICT studies is an increasing of ableist terminology inside the title or the article, while in the field of linguistics, we are a decline in this type. So it's very, very important, the collaboration, because a lot of people that develop technology, I speak for sign language for deaf, but I think I have the idea that it's also for autism, a lot of ableism. They use terminology like normal, abnormal, and so on, that we have to avoid to use, please. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Olga, for that. I think she's really covered a lot of the advice that I would also give. I think, it's really important to kind of get familiar with these different interfaces that are present, and that all depends on the population group that you're actually targeting, because everyone does have different needs. And in order to really understand what sorts of interfaces are most appropriate or will produce the biggest results, would be to, of course, then engage in a lot of empirical research. And that is something that is currently lacking, of course. And, getting user experiences and collecting user preferences are really, really important for different types of disability groups. And we see this as a really big issue currently when you look at clinical trials, where immediately you'll notice that an exclusion criteria for participation is having some sort of disability. So, there's a really, really big gap for trying to collect empirical data and empirical research on such specific disability groups, and trying to understand and what are their preferences, what do they need, what actually works as an implementation tool for these populations, what doesn't, what is actually futile. And so I would also encourage a lot of empirical research and, like Olga mentioned, getting advocates or representatives of these groups involved in discussions, not only in the implementation stage or in the user testing stage, but also in the design of these technologies, to firstly understand what is ethical and what is representative of the needs of this population. Perhaps there are things that we won't think of unless we speak to advocates of these communities to really understand, what is lacking, what do they actually require. We can sit here at a table looking at a research paper saying, you know, oh, research suggests that we should be targeting a social aspect for certain groups, but perhaps that is actually not the biggest issues that they face in their communities. Perhaps they have an access or a lack of access to resources, and trying to kind of target these requirements or needs that these groups would be to first contact the representative and the advocates for these groups. Also, just to build on what Olga said, I think there's also a lot of guidelines and frameworks that are present in society that perhaps technology researchers or people building these technologies are not so aware of. And they can actually provide not only the guiding principles behind developing ethical technologies and the design aspects of such devices, but also they can help you to kind of come up with a checklist of what are the things that are required for building these technologies. Perhaps these are things that you've missed. What are things that can make user experiences, that can enhance user experiences, sorry. So I think there's a lot of guidelines out there, and I know there are guidelines that are also validated by government ministries or departments of health, but also just international organizations that act as advocates for certain groups or certain disability groups. And so I think utilizing these advocacy resources and engaging in maybe community awareness programs can also help us to collect data quite easily from community members and disability groups on trying to understand their needs and what they require and what their wishes are, and how can we help them enhance their everyday life, basically. Yeah, I really have nothing more to add. I think Olga did a really great job in providing her advice.
Maybe I would like to ask a follow-up question to both that actually kind of tries to grasp one topic that is all culture, the differences in needs. They're always coming up, but there is this need of adapting the technology to how people are, or to what population they might belong to, so to say. And I just realized my connection isn't stable. If you don't hear something, just let me know, please. Okay. Yes. So my question is kind of, let's say, very practical in that sense. Maybe you have an anecdote coming from your research, or maybe from your experience in the field. Maybe sometimes you did some, I don't know, exploration of how the daily life of these people go about, and maybe some difficulties they might have. And I wanted to ask you if you have ever experienced some, let's call it cultural clash between how the technology was built for them and how they actually were and what they actually needed. Maybe, Rasita, do you have an example of something like that?
I mean, off the top of my head, when I think of a technology that was built for a certain purpose and it's perhaps spiraled in a different way, especially with how the users engage with it, I would immediately think of social care robots that I studied. So thinking of perhaps robotic pets or robotic dolls that were kind of designed to look as real as possible and be presented as a form of a companion to the users that engage with them. And often it is individuals with cognitive impairments or the elderly patients. And I think there was a lot of danger surrounding, well, not danger, but like perceived danger, which was in the form of deception, and trying to understand how morally acceptable is it for us to allow the users to engage in some sort of false relationship with these robotic pets that don't actually exist and aren't actually able to form any sort of human relationships as the user is then creating, just because they don't have the ability to provide human emotions and create human bonds as we think they are, because, you know, at the end of the day, they do not possess any sorts of human abilities or human emotions. But when we do see interactions between the users, especially with robotic pets that look very, very realistic, you can see that these users really do treat them as though they were living pets. And at the end of the day, there's a really big bioethical discussion that goes around, you know, are we being are we upholding our roles as caregivers or as healthcare workers and providing a technology for somewhat of a falsified relationship between its user, even though we can see that there are certain benefits that they provide to managing behavioral and psychological symptoms, especially within dementia. They can also help the users to manage issues of isolation, which was a really big consideration a few years ago when they had to be put into lockdowns and isolated from other residential care residences in the nursing care facilities. You know, it really did act as a really great support tool when there was no other form of human interaction that was available to them. And it's always considered to be somewhat of like a slippery slope where we don't know where the moral boundaries are, even though these were created to provide some sort of fake interaction. They are kind of sliding into becoming more of like a human expected relationship. And so when these individuals kind of step out of this interaction with these robotic pets, they expect a human interaction to kind of replicate the interaction that they've had with these robotic pets, you know. So if they don't always receive positive validation from a human person, they may actually not know how to respond to this and kind of retract and become even more isolated. So there are certain dangers when it comes to isolation that even though these pets were supposed to rectify, they may actually be making worse in human-to-human interactions. So that's just a quick example that I can think of.
Thank you. Olga, do you have an example like that of cultural clash between user and technology?
I'm thinking now in the field of deaf population and sign languages, there are maybe one type of technology that deaf people avoid to use, and there are the wearable touch glove that translates sign language into speech in real time. A lot of research groups are working on these gloves that seems very beautiful. You put the gloves in the hand of a deaf person, he or she signing, and automatically the gloves translate the sign into a vocal language in speech in real time. But deaf people expressly make a statement where the World Federation of the Deaf, in which says, please stop to spend money to work on these gloves. We don't need these gloves. That is one sense, for example, because only hearing people can understand deaf, but it's not the contrary, it's not a reciprocity. And the second very big problem is that sign languages are not only in the hand of the signers, but all the body, the head posture, the eye direction, the facial expression, the mouth movement are strictly part of the sign languages. And another example in which I am working now is the sign language, the use of sign language avatar. Also, this field is a long time that a lot of different group of research in the world, in Europe and other parts of the world are trying to make this avatar, this artificial human that are able to sign a different type of sign language, but also in this case, the World Federation of the Deaf, together with the World Association of Sign Language Interpreters, issue a statement in 2018 in which they advise all the people that want to work on sign languages have to involve deaf people. This is our language. We don't like this avatar because also the old avatar, the avatar that we have until now, have no facial expression or very strange facial expression, and also have a lack in fluidity of the language. They pose one sign after another. Is this without grammar, without syntax? It's the same. We listen to speak some people in a vocal language that put one word after another, but is composite crazy sentence that have no sense at all. And so now we are working in the field of the avatar, creating an avatar that first not only can produce sign language, but can also understand in real time sign languages. But we work starting from the very beginning, starting from the idea with deaf people, different group. We make a survey to asking a lot of deaf people how they want the avatar in different parts. So yes, if we don't involve the group in all the process of not only in the last part of the production of this technology, but starting from the idea. If we simply ask people, do you want a glove? No, thank you. And we can avoid to spend a lot of money on this type of research that have no success at all. Thank you for the question.
Thank you very much. Now maybe I'm gonna pass to the more personal questions. Maybe I'm gonna start with you, Rasita. So I wanted to ask you if maybe someone in the audience might be a caregiver or a family member of an individual with a condition that might impair their communication skills. Maybe you have an advice for them when they encounter ethical dilemmas in their loved one's care, and how maybe conversational technology can help them with this.
Yeah, thank you, Catty. I think that's a really important question to ask. And it's something that does plague a lot of informal caregivers, so family members that are in the caring for someone in their family that does have some sort of disability. And firstly, I would really encourage the family members to sit down with their doctor and determine some sort of care plan that reflects the preferences and also the values of those in their care. And this might obviously include going over an advanced directive or an advanced care plan that may have actually been created when the individual still had capacity for decision making and communication, verbal communication, and using that alongside considerations, of course, of medical benefit and medical futility. So understanding whether an intervention or a medical treatment is actually supposed to improve the condition of the individual from a medical point of view. And of course, this is something then that the doctor would advise on. And of course, to get a better idea of what are the shifting needs and requirements of the person with the disability, I think this would be a really crucial first step. Secondly, and by using these care plans as a second step, we can also then get an indication for the kind of care that they perhaps wish to receive. And so when we come across new dilemmas or new ethical issues, we can kind of reflect back on these care plans and look at how they perhaps wanted to be treated or cared for in a particular situation, and be able to apply that into a new dilemma and say, this is kind of similar, this kind of encapsulates what their values and wishes would be, or their preferences towards receiving a certain type of care or intervention. And we could maybe transpose that into this new ethical dilemma that maybe we hadn't considered when we were making these advanced care directives, but still be able to make a decision for based on the known wishes and the known values. And this is obviously really helpful, especially when we come across the new dilemmas or new ethical considerations that people are kind of unsure initially on how to proceed, especially to make sure that it continues to provide the best care for the person in their care. And usually when we think of such scenarios or such justifications for decision making, we consider it as the best interests principle. And this basically means that the care provided or the intervention that's being provided is done so to promote the welfare and the interests of the person that's being cared for, as opposed to the interests of the carer or the family member, or for the benefit of the community, or in the case of clinical trials, for the betterment of science. So we're always putting the person that's being cared for at the forefront and trying to imagine what would be in the best interest in terms of welfare and autonomy, and to maintain the dignity of this person, and putting aside everyone else's requirements as a second priority. Secondly, I would also encourage family members to perhaps get in touch with a case manager. And this is quite a controversial topic because I know a lot of countries don't immediately assign case managers for certain disabilities. And this is a continuous point of discussion in many national dementia care plans internationally, where they don't provide any sort of navigators, as they're called, or case managers to kind of guide the families through different processes and the different stages of dementia, because there are differing needs along the progression of dementia. And often there are a lot of relevant guidelines and care practices that are present, like I mentioned before, from the government and the ministries and departments of health. And of course, the family members are not so aware of what is out there. They may not know how to access it or what resources are available to them, both also financially, not just physically, in terms of caregiving. And the role of these case managers is to be able to guide these family members to the correct frameworks or guidelines in order to make their care a bit easier or more streamlined, or to even understand things such as, when to withhold medication, when to withdraw certain forms of treatment, how do we proceed when we need to perhaps mechanically ventilate them, what would be the preferences for, forced feeding or assisted nutrition and hydration. So having some sort of guidelines can really help, your average family member to understand, well, this is what's legal, this is what's ethical, and then we can kind of balance that with the values and preferences of the person in the care to really understand how to proceed next. And again, lastly, my advice would be to not be afraid of new assistive technologies that are being implemented as communication strategies, especially. I know there's a lot of skepticism that goes around new developments and advancements in technology, and also how users might actually interact with them, especially in the case of dementia. Often these are users that are more elderly and, not considered to be so tech friendly. But if we actually look at the recent trends in research, especially in information technology in healthcare, there's a general positive receptivity to these advancements, both by the users and the caregivers, especially when they see the enormous benefits that these technologies can actually provide, both for caregiving, but also to improve quality of life. And, there are also instances where these benefits reduce the need for hospitalizations or using pharmacological interventions, which ultimately do make the dementia a lot more worse. So if we can adopt these technologies as an intervention way before we need medical intervention, then this is, really well appreciated, and can also help the individual with dementia to live as long as possible and also for as well as possible. And it can be quite fun and immersive and engaging, and actually be something that empowers the individual at the end of the day to feel as though they still have some sort of independence in their everyday lives, even though they have a condition that is unfortunately unable to be treated. Yeah, that's the quick 3 advices that I would perhaps provide.
Thank you very much.
It was enlightening. I instead have a question for Olga, and can you share some practical application or implications of your research for educators, caregivers, and professionals working with children with diverse developmental needs?
Okay, thank you. So a short 2 words on my lab, that is the Language and Communication Across Modality Lab that I had. In the lab, we have 4 deaf employers, and within these 4 deaf, we have the first deaf researchers who have permanent position in an Italian research institution. So I'm very happy to say this is very new news. And all the research that we conducted in this laboratory with different units of research are always marked by close consideration of the applied background, strongly enforcing close partnership with organization, deaf organization, but also other type autistic organization and practitioners that working in education and clinical practice. And so all lab research aims at providing results, materials, which may have a relevant social impact and help other researchers and practitioners with their daily challenge. So certainly we have to answer your question. We have a lot of practical application and implication of our research. For example, in early intervention programs, we also Rasita speak about the caregivers, and it's crucial for children with diverse developmental needs, including deaf children, that the parent, the caregiver, are involved in the process of their intervention, mainly in the early phase of development. So early intervention that include also the parents, the caregivers, and so professionals can use our research findings to train and to coach parents and caregivers about the effective strategies for supporting their children at home. And this empowers families to play an active role in their child development. And the other is the multimodal communication strategy, which we have talked about for all this hour together, truly understanding the benefits of multimodal communication, that is combining speech, gesture, other body mode of expression with also sign language, can allow educators and caregivers to create communicative environments that are more inclusive and accessible for all. For example, our research in language acquisition in deaf children provide insight into the better timing and methods for teaching sign language, written language, and spoken language to deaf children. And it supports the development of bilingual education programs. And I return newly on the deaf culture and also deaf identity. Professionals that working with deaf children can foster a sense of pride in deaf culture and identity, and promoting a positive self-perception and self-advocacy. This recognition is critical for the emotional well-being of deaf individuals and deaf children particularly. And the recognizing and the understanding that there is different ways in which individuals can communicate is essential also for respecting neurodiversity, as it acknowledges that there are various valid and meaningful communication styles and modes, but that are all on the same level. We have to avoid thinking that the voice is the better one, but all are on the same level. And so all this knowledge can be applied in educational, healthcare, technology, and various other fields to promote an effective and equitable communication. I think that is very important to move toward a world in which the neurodiversity is a richness and not, oh, we have to thinking about this poor disability person. No, the difference in the world is always a richness. in the natural world as well in the human world. Thank you.
Okay, in this regard of what you already just said, someone asked on our chat if does human bot and human-human interaction at the level of multimodality change? Is it possible that, especially for the aspect of the care plan mentioned before by Rasita, the human feels freer to express his or her preferences than human communication? I don't know who wants to answer this question.
Rasita, if you want.
Yeah, I can take the lead with this. I think that's a really good point. And, you know, when we discuss chatbots in healthcare at the moment, the humanization of these healthcare chatbots is a really, really big discussion. Trying to understand, and like you've mentioned, sometimes people do feel a lot more comfortable speaking to a chatbot, whether it be because of fears or, you know, they're just not comfortable. And this is something that the chatbots are now being able to provide. They're able to, even though they're created in a rule-based kind of syntax where they don't actually understand what you're responding to them. They've just been trained to provide responses to you in a way that is very humanized, and it makes you feel as though they can sympathize with you and empathize with you. So there's a new way that these chatbots are being to kind of even better the human-to-human interactions. And I think there's a lot of positives and a lot of negatives as well that are present with this. And the positives are, like you've mentioned, Sarah, yourself, that, you know, it can allow users to perhaps express more than they would with perhaps a human, let's say, physician, as opposed to a mental health chatbot, for instance, because those are something that I think most of us are very familiar with. And of course, there's a lot of negatives as well when you think about perhaps from the side of data privacy. You know, how are these data points handled? Who are they actually being passed on to? You know, there's a great risk that if these data then processed to, for instance, health insurance companies, it could maybe affect the form of insurance care that you receive. So there's a lot of negatives that are also surrounding this humanization of healthcare chatbots, especially. Olga, did you want to add anything?
I don't know. We in the field of chatbot, we are also involved with chatbots that are able to sign with deaf people to make the conversation and more accessible or user-friendly. But also, I think that we have, if I understand well the question of Sarah, I think that we have to work a lot also in a human-human interaction, not only delegate to technology, because if I understand Sarah want to say, but it could be that technology is far more advanced than human-human communication. Yes, maybe this is a risk, but I hope that we have to work a lot on human-human communication in order that our society is truly open to the very difference, not only deaf, that are my passion. And sometimes it's not a big issue. Sometimes it's only to know how to communicate with the other people, to have some basic issue in mind. For example, we make a lot of meeting with the school, with a professor and also student in a school, in order to give with the deaf together, in order to put students in classroom directly in the difficulty to communicate with this person, but also autistic group. They make a lot of meeting with the school because we have to starting from the little baby until now. And for example, when I follow the first sign language class, I follow 4 years to learn to use sign language, Italian sign language list. And with me, there is, now I start to sign and speak together, because when I am thinking to sign, because in our lab, we have 4 deaf and 4 hearing researchers, and we sign and speak all the time. There is a perfect bilingual lab of the work, but there is one student in the classroom of sign language that are American, and she's very surprised because she told me, but here in Italy, in the school, you don't learn something about sign language or the Braille system for blind people, because in my school, I learn a little, but I know what is sign language, what is Braille. I know that there are different type of language, different type of people. So this is the change, the through way to go away. Now we start with some sign language, Italian sign language course in Puglia, in one region of Italy, but we are far from to start with a more strong change in our mind. Okay, thank you for the question. It's very interesting.
Thank you, Olga. What you said in a certain way makes me happy, because something is going to change, but we are still far. So we have to, the more we talk about it, the more people will understand something will change. So thank you, everybody. I don't know if someone wants to ask some other questions. Otherwise, I have to take to hand everything. I want to thank you also, Kati, for joining us and to arrange everything with us. It's the first time, but I hope it's gonna be the first of a long series. And also thanks to Rasita and Olga and everyone who's been here today. So thank you, everybody, and have a good night, have a good evening. I will.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye.